The kettle hissed on the stove, but Elay didn't move. His 8-year-old daughter, Maggie, stood in the center of the kitchen, her eyes fixed on a dark corner where the wallpaper had begun to peel like dead skin. She wasn't looking at the shadows. She was nodding to them, her lips moving in a frantic, silent vibration that sounded like dry leaves scraping against a tombstone. On the porch outside, a row of small figures made of bird bones, and Maggie's own golden hair sat waiting, bound together with wet earth that smelled of things buried too long. Deep beneath the floorboards, the mountain exhaled. It wasn't the sound of shifting rock or a failing support beam. It was a guttural whisper, an ancient dialect vibrating through the soles of Elay's boots, calling his name from the mouth of a mine that should have been silent. As the kitchen windows began to rattle in their frames and the shadows in the corner grew solid enough to touch, Elay realized the coal dust wasn't just in the air anymore. The debt the mountain had been tallying for 100 years was finally due, and it was coming to collect his children first. The kettle on the stove hisses, spitting steam through a crack in the spout. But Elay Hargroove remains motionless. His fingers press into the chipped edge of the table, knuckles whitening as he watches the way the lamplight stretches his shadow across the wall. Long, skeletal, like something already half buried. The floorboards groan underfoot when he shifts, the sound swallowed by the rhythmic clatter of Mrs. Dalloway's loom next door. Ever since her boy took the fever, the rhythm never falters, even when the thread snaps. Elay opens his eyes long before the first gray sliver of light touches the Kentucky horizon. The room remains draped in a viscous gloom, where microscopic particles of coal dust dance in the stagnant air. He draws a deep breath, and that familiar bitterness settles at the root of his tongue, scratching his throat with a dry, rattling cough. Moving slowly, he feels the crust of yesterday's shift in his joints, each vertebra popping like dry kindling. He pulls on the heavy canvas work shirt, which has retained the damp chill of the tunnels, and his calloused fingers find the heavy boots by the bed. They are caked in a layer of indestructible black silt that has, over 40 years, migrated from the soles of his shoes into the very grain of the floorboards, the weave of his sheets, and the pores of his own skin. In the kitchen, the air is thick with the scent of cheap oats and wood smoke. Elay sets a bowl of steaming porridge before his son, but Caleb doesn't look up. The boy's dark, greasy hair hangs over his eyes, a curtain drawn against the world his father inhabits. When Elay tries to ask about the day's chores, Caleb shoves his chair back, the screech of wood on wood sounding like a dying animal. The boy stares at his own clean fingernails, a silent indictment of the man sitting across from him. A man who smells of grease, blasting caps, and the grave. Caleb's lip curls in a wordless sneer as Elay's scarred hand rests on the table. And without a word, the boy stalks out of the house, leaving a wake of cold indifference that chills the room more than the morning draft. Elay turns toward the living room, his heart sinking as he finds Maggie. The 8-year-old stands in the center of the rug, as still as a figure carved from pale limestone. She's staring into a corner where the shadows of the peeling wallpaper twist into knots. He calls her name, but she doesn't flinch. Her lips move in a frantic, silent vibration, releasing a sound like the rustle of dry leaves in a storm. When he takes a step toward her, she tilts her head, listening to the empty air, nodding in agreement with a voice only she can hear. A shiver tracks down Elay's spine, cold and sharp. Maggie whispers a word of consent to the corner, her gray eyes vacant, ignoring the hand he reaches out to her. The whistle at the colliery screams, a jagged sound that tears through the morning fog. Elay finds himself squeezed into the rusted cage of the lift, descending into the throat of the earth with a violent lurch. The lamp on his helmet cuts a weak path through the darkness of the drift, illuminating wet walls that weep a brackish, mineral-heavy water. He swings his pick into the seam, pouring every ounce of resentment and exhaustion into the strike. Sweat stings his eyes, mixing with the dust to form a black slurry that coats his face. He works until his ears ring, trying to drown out the memory of Caleb's hate and Maggie's hollow stare. The rhythmic thud of the pneumatic drills and the clatter of the ore cars fill his skull, providing a brutal sanctuary from the thoughts of the house on the hill. Hours into the shift, the light on his helmet flickers, casting long, jerky shadows that play tricks on his mind. Disoriented by a sudden surge of pressure in his ears, Elay takes a wrong turn at the junction. He stumbles into the western sector, a place abandoned decades ago, where the air is stagnant and heavy with the scent of ancient rot. His boots sink into a fine, powdery dust that muffles every footfall. He stops, his breath hitching, as a sound pierces the heavy silence of the rock. From behind a jagged wall of slate comes a whisper, low, guttural, and intimate. It is the archaic dialect of the deep hollows, the way the old men used to talk before the company stores and the paved roads arrived. He presses his ear to the granite, and the stone pulses against his jaw like a living heart. The mountain exhales his name, Elay Hargroove. The syllables are stretched with a terrifying tenderness, as if the rock itself has been waiting for him to return. He recoils, but the echo of his name follows him, bouncing off the low, jagged ceiling. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration that bypasses his ears and resonates directly in his marrow. Suddenly, the roof above him groans. A shower of shale precedes a massive slab that slams into the floor exactly where he stood a second before. He scrambles back, his lungs burning with a sudden cloud of grit. He checks the gas sensor on his belt. The green light glows steady. The steel supports nearby are straight and true, yet the mountain had struck at him with surgical precision. The silence that follows is broken only by the horrific scream of wood. The old oak pillars, thick as a man's torso, begin to buckle and twist under an invisible weight. He watches in frozen horror as the wood splinters, the bark peeling away to reveal pale, tortured fibers that snap with the sound of rifle shots. The floor beneath his boots hums with a frequency that makes his teeth ache, a warning from the deep. He flees the sector, the cage ride back to the surface, feeling like an escape from a closing mouth. When he reaches the porch of his home, the sun is setting, casting a bruised purple light over the valley. He stops at the top step. Arranged in a neat, ritualistic row before the door are small figures. He leans down, his hand trembling. They are woven from yellowed grass and the delicate, translucent bones of birds bound together with strands of golden hair. Maggie's hair. The scent of wet earth and old meat wafts from the offerings. A faint, dry chuckle drifts on the wind. But when he spins around, the street is empty. The neighbors' houses, nothing but dark silhouettes against the dying light. Inside, the kitchen is cold. Maggie sits at the table, her gaze fixed on the empty chair beside her. She turns her head slowly as he enters, a strange, knowing smile playing on her lips. A smile that belongs to someone much older, someone who has seen the underside of the world. She tells him, her voice flat and rhythmic, that the people from the stones came to see her. She describes their long, multifaceted fingers and eyes like polished coal. They have been waiting for him, she says. They have come to collect the debt. Elay grabs the grass figures from the porch and thrusts them into the hearth, striking a match with frantic hands. As the flames take hold of the bone and hair, the temperature in the room plummets. A heavy sigh echoes behind him, but the corner is empty. The walls begin to hum, the wallpaper vibrating as the whispers from the mines seep through the plaster. He clamps his hands over his ears, but the voices are inside his head now, chanting in time with the crackle of the fire. The shadows on the wall stretch toward him, elongated and skeletal, reaching for his throat. He pulls Caleb and Maggie into the corner, his body a shield against the dark, as the house itself begins to breathe. The next morning brings a different kind of silence. Elay stands before the colliery gates, but the usual roar of the fans is absent. A fresh notice is pinned to the rusted mesh, the paper snapping in the wind like a flag. Closed indefinitely. The company's seal looks like a bloodstain on the page. He watches the guard hang a massive padlock on the chain, a finality that feels like a death sentence. There is no vibration in the air, no hope of a paycheck, only the crushing weight of the coming winter. He returns home empty-handed. Caleb sees the lack of a grocery sack and explodes. The boy kicks his chair over, water from a glass spreading across the table and dripping onto Elay's boots. Caleb screams, the veins in his neck bulging as he points to the empty larder, cursing the man who can't even provide bread. Elay takes the abuse in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor, until Caleb grabs his collar and shakes him with a desperate feral strength. In his son's eyes, Elay sees not just anger, but the realization that the man he relied on is broken. Maggie drifts between them, her presence cutting through the shouting like a blade. She adjusts her collar and tells them a guest is coming for dinner. She points to the empty chair and explains that the voices behind the walls promised to bring their mother back from the deep heart of the mountain. A draft, smelling of limestone and old grief, sweeps through the room. Caleb recoils, watching as Maggie carefully lays a third plate on the table, her small hand stroking the empty air as if she were touching her mother's hair. Driven by a need for answers, Elay treks through the black-eyed Susans and overgrowth to a shack on the edge of the gorge. Silas, the former foreman who lost his sight in the '84 cave-in, sits on the porch. His milk-white eyes seem to look straight through Elay's skin. The old man smells of rot and cheap leaf tobacco. He doesn't turn his head, but his fingers begin a rhythmic drumming on his knee. Elay crouches beside him, and Silas's hand shoots out, gripping Elay's wrist with a strength that shouldn't exist in such a frail frame. Silas whispers of the blood debt. He speaks of the pact the first settlers made with the things that lived in the dark before the sun was born. The recent blasting, he wheezes, has cracked the ancient seals. The mountain is hungry, and it remembers the names of those who took its wealth without paying the price in spirit. Silas's breath is a cloud of black dust as he warns that the earth never forgets a thief. Elay pulls away, his skin burning where the old man touched him. Back in the safety of his bathroom, Elay strips off his shirt. In the dim yellow light of the vanity, he sees them, black, ink-like stains on his ribs. They look like the roots of a tree, spreading under his skin. He scrubs at them with a coarse brush until he bleeds. But the marks only grow darker, more defined. They aren't on his skin. They are growing out from his bones. His flesh feels cold, hard like anthracite, and he can feel the black threads creeping up his neck, a slow-motion strangulation. The house begins to fight back. When Caleb tries to bolt for the door, the oak slab slams shut with a force that nearly takes his fingers. The windows in the parlor explode inward, 1,000 glass diamonds peppering the room. Caleb falls to his knees, shielding his face, as the very air becomes thick and heavy, like walking through chest-high water. Elay watches as the shadows of the furniture detach themselves from the floor, rising into tall, faceless pillars of gloom that hem them in. Maggie begins to sing. It is a sound of grinding metal and shifting tectonic plates, a song that was never meant for human vocal cords. The floorboards in the kitchen split with a deafening crack, revealing a black fissure that seems to drop into the center of the world. A smell of ancient dust and damp earth fills the house. Maggie's pupils expand until her eyes are two voids of obsidian, and she sways in time with a pulse that comes from the bedrock. Caleb clings to Elay's jacket, his bravado gone, replaced by a whimpering terror that breaks Elay's heart. The storm outside reaches a fever pitch. A gust of wind, powerful enough to lift the roof, shatters the front door's remaining hinges. Maggie, still in her trance, walks out into the lashing rain. Her bare feet don't seem to touch the mud as she drifts toward the woods. Elay and Caleb scramble after her, the forest itself turning into a gauntlet of grasping claws and tripping roots. They reach the old ventilation shaft, a concrete throat sticking out of the hillside. Maggie doesn't stop. She steps into the void. She doesn't fall. She descends as if the air were water, cradled by a column of gray mist that smells of ozone. Elay screams, reaching for her, but she is already sinking into the throat of the mountain. He and Caleb follow, climbing down the rusted iron rungs into a world where the rock glows with a pale, sickly phosphor. The deeper they go, the more the reality of the surface fades. The walls are covered in a bioluminescent moss that pulses like a lung. A sudden tremor shakes the shaft, and the way they came is obliterated by a fall of massive boulders. They are trapped. In the cavern below, the shadows of the ancestors wait. They are figures of coal and smoke, carrying spectral picks, their eyes glowing with the same cold light as the moss. They stand between Elay and his daughter, a silent wall of the dead. Then, the mountain itself speaks. The wall of the cavern splits open, and the entity emerges. It is a colossus of anthracite and living roots, its skin shimmering with the oily sheen of raw ore. It doesn't use words. It pours images into Elay's mind. A bargain. The safety of his children in exchange for his eternal presence in the dark. He sees himself turning to stone, his consciousness fused with the strata, a living pillar to hold up the world while his children walk free. He sees the marks on his body flare with a brilliant, agonizing blue light. The threads are no longer just under his skin. They are tethers, anchoring him to the floor of the cave. Caleb tries to reach Maggie, but the entity drops a slab of granite, pinning the boy's leg. The sound of bone snapping echoes in the chamber. Caleb screams, his blood soaking into the dried dust. And Elay realizes that the entity is not just a monster. It is a reflection of his own refusal to leave this dying place. His love for the mountain, his fear of the world outside, is the very thing that gives the shadows their strength. In the pocket of his work coat, his hand brushes against something cold and waxy. 3 sticks of stolen dynamite and a blasting cap. He had taken them months ago, a petty theft he'd forgotten. Now, they are his only hope. He lunges forward, the blue tethers tearing his flesh as he breaks free from the floor. He crawls to Caleb, using a steel pry bar to heave the stone off his son's crushed leg. The entity roars, a sound that brings down a rain of stalactites. But Elay is a man possessed. He shoves the dynamite into a deep fissure in the central pillar of the cave, the heart of the mountain's power. He grabs the limp Maggie and throws her over his shoulder, then hauls Caleb toward the narrow ventilation flue. The entity lashes out with shards of obsidian, the stones burying themselves in Elay's back, but he doesn't stop. He pushes Caleb up into the pipe, then hands him the silent, dreaming Maggie. With the children safe in the flue, Elay turns back. The entity's hand, cold as a glacier, closes around his throat. He can't breathe, his vision is failing, but his thumb is on the detonator. He triggers the blast. The world turns into white light and thunder. The central pillar disintegrates, and the ceiling of the western sector collapses in a 1,000,000-ton wave of rock. Elay is thrown into the flue by the force of the explosion. the shock wave nearly bursting his lungs. He is spat out onto the surface just as the hillside swallows itself. They leave Kentucky that night, the old truck rattling as they cross the state line. Elay cannot speak. The blast or the entity has taken his voice forever, leaving him with only a raspy whistle. They find a city of glass and neon, a place where the dirt is paved over and the air smells of exhaust instead of coal. They sit in a park, the sun bright and the grass green, and for a moment, they are free. But then Maggie stops. She tilts her head, her gray eyes going distant as she looks at a cracks in the sidewalk. She leans down, whispering to the dark space between the concrete. Elay watches her, the black roots under his skin beginning to pulse again, a slow, rhythmic reminder. The mountain is gone, but the debt is in the blood, and the earth never truly lets go of what it owns.